The marsh was darker than the sky. It held the night like something earned, thick, unmoving, heavy with silence. Even the moon had abandoned it hours ago, sinking behind the distant line of reeds without leaving a trace of silver behind. Only a faint glimmer of damp light lingered over the black water, a reflection of nothing in particular. The heron stood motionless near the center of the marsh. Its legs disappeared into the water, long feathers clinging close to the body, damp from the night air. The bird's eye, sharp, pale, unblinking, watched the horizon where morning usually began. But today, nothing changed there. The line between earth and sky stayed dark and uncertain. A faint ripple spread outward from the stillness below. Something alive, or something remembering being alive, brushed along the heron's foot. The bird didn't react. The marsh always moved, even when the world did not. The first sound came slowly. Not a call. Not wind. Just a soft release of breath from the swamp. A thick bubble rising and bursting near the roots of a dead tree. The noise echoed strangely, caught in the damp air as if unsure where to go next. The heron shifted its weight. One wing opened slightly, shaking off tiny beads of water that fell with no splash. The surface was too dense, too still to allow sound. A strand of mist drifted low, sliding along the feathers like a thin layer of smoke. The heron watched the horizon again, still dark, still refusing to change. It leaned forward, its long neck stretched, muscles flexing beneath the cold plumage. With a slow push of its legs, it lifted away from the black surface, wings spreading wide, their motion almost graceful enough to be soundless. Almost. A single drop of water slipped from its clawed foot and hit the surface below. A tiny impact that should have gone unnoticed. But the marsh reacted. The circle widened, spiraled, held shape longer than water should. The heron rose higher, climbing through the thick air with effort. Its wings cut the darkness into uneven pieces, shadows sliding against each other. The bird expected resistance from wind, but there was none. The sky did not feel like sky. It felt like a ceiling, too low and too heavy. Below, the marsh grew smaller, but no less dark. The heron glanced down once. Its reflection was faint and broken, a shape that refused to fully form, as though light had lost the memory of how to draw it. The bird turned toward the east again. On any other day, the horizon would have offered a hint of pale color by now, a thread of warmth pulling night apart, but the line remained closed, sealed beneath the weight of hours that refused to pass. The heron beat its wings harder. It did not know time, but it knew the rhythm of dawn. Something in its bones expected the world to change. It didn't. The sky stayed dark. The marsh stayed silent. And the heron, the only thing that dared to move, kept rising, unaware that behind it, the water's surface had already swallowed the circle of its departure, leaving no sign a bird had ever touched this world at all. The heron glided low along the edge of the reeds, each wing beat slow and considered. Below, the marsh spread outward in a chaotic network of channels, pools, and half-rotted roots. The water was dark enough to appear solid, a thick mirror with nothing behind it. The air smelled of decay and wet soil. Old plants, drowned before they could die properly, drifted near the surface. Brown strands of grass intertwined with bits of moss and thin pieces of bark, all matted together like a forgotten net. The heron landed near a narrow patch of land, barely wide enough to stand on. The mud sucked at its feet as if trying to pull the bird back into the water. The ground trembled softly, not from the heron's weight, but from something moving deep beneath the muck, something slow and unhurried. The bird scanned the darkness with calm precision, its head turned in tiny angles, searching for the shimmer of scales, the twitch of a frog's leg, the brief movement that separated life from everything else. But nothing stirred. No chirp, no splash, no buzzing of wings. Creatures that belonged to night had already fallen silent. Creatures that belonged today had not risen. It was a gap in time, a moment that shouldn't have lasted. Mist thickened around the reeds, coiling low to the ground like smoke that refused to rise. The heron's feathers absorbed the dampness until they weighed more than they should. It shook once, sending droplets out in an uneven arc. They hit the mud with no sound. The marsh watched. The reeds stood perfectly still, too still for any place touched by wind. The heron stretched its neck again, probing forward with its long beak into the water. It searched with instinct more than hunger. The night had been long. The body needed energy before the next flight, if there was going to be a next flight. Its beak broke the surface. A faint swirl appeared beneath, twisting outward like ink. When the heron lifted its head again, the swirl remained unchanged, as if the water resisted motion, refusing to remember the shape of impact. A soft creak rolled through the swamp. The bird froze. It came from the direction of the dead forest on the marsh's far side, a single branch shifting under pressure that shouldn't exist. The heron waited, alert, nerves pulled tight in absolute focus. The sound did not return. The mist shifted, but the trees remained silhouettes, crooked lines against darkness. The heron bent low and drank, ignoring the taste of the cold, stale water. Its throat moved slowly, every swallow loud only inside its own body. When it lifted its head again, a small bead of water hung from the tip of its beak. It hesitated there, heavy, clear, then fell. The drop vanished before touching the ground. The heron blinked, not understanding. The marsh absorbed movement not like water, but like breath. A long inhale without release. The bird shook out its wings and stepped back toward the open shallows. It was time to try again. The world around it had not woken. The marsh had not exhaled. But the heron would keep moving, because if it stopped, there would be nothing left in this place that remembered how. The heron lifted away from the mud with effort, its wings dragging pockets of cold air upward with each beat. Droplets slid from its feathers, but never made a sound when they fell back into the marsh. It was as though the ground swallowed noise before it had a chance to exist. The bird climbed higher, aiming toward the east, toward where the light should be, but the horizon remained unchanged. A flat, unbroken dark that offered no promise of morning. Usually dawn announced itself long before the sun arrived. A shift in temperature, a touch of pink behind the clouds, a distant flutter of waking wings. Now, there was nothing. The sky looked like one wide shadow stretched tight from ridge to ridge. The heron flew through mist so thick it clung to its wings. The air tasted of cold water and algae. Every breath chilled the lungs. Below, the marsh blurred into a single dark mass. The shapes of reeds, pools, and fallen logs faded into one continuous texture, a flat ocean of black and gray. The bird angled its head slightly, scanning for any sign of contrast. A brighter star, a change in wind, the thin line of light that splits night open. Nothing. Even the stars were dull, washed out, as if they had grown tired of shining without audience. The heron banked left, wings tilting wide. Its feathers rustled, but the sound died against its own body. It flew past a cluster of trees at the edge of marshland. Their branches drooped downward, heavy with moisture and weight. They looked less like trees and more like shadows, trying to remember shape. The leaves didn't move. The trunks didn't creak. Everything was paused. The heron's instincts told it to search for open sky, a place where air moved freely and space existed above. But the night pressed down from above like a thick lid. Even the highest stretches of the sky seemed too low, too close. The bird beat its wings harder. If morning would not come, perhaps altitude would find it. The ground eventually let go of the last traces of reflection, and the heron flew into a space without references. No horizon, no changing color, only an endless dark that resisted every motion. Its heart pumped fast but steady, a small clock inside a world that had forgotten how to measure time. The heron slowed. Its wings grew heavy. The sky offered no lift, just a cold weight pressing back. It stopped climbing. The bird circled once, struggling to see through the haze. The marsh was gone from sight. The trees were swallowed by distance. The stars looked no closer than before. It hovered there, suspended in a time that refused to move forward. The sky was not waiting for dawn. It had simply stopped believing in it. The heron glided back toward land, wings pulled tight to conserve energy. It descended slowly, picking a direction only because standing still in the air offered no answers. Below, The land rose into a line of trees that marked the marsh's edge, a border between wet ground and the forest's deeper dark. The bird landed near the first tree, its feet sinking slightly into damp soil. The ground felt colder here, as if the shade had been trapped too long. The heron folded its wings and looked around. The trees stood close together, trunks dark with moisture, bark rough and cracked. Moss clung to their bases in small patches, like reminders of color the world once had. But the branches pointed downward. Not broken, not burned, just tired, as if they no longer remembered how to reach upward. The heron stepped carefully between roots that twisted like old ropes. Leaves underfoot were soggy and limp, giving way with soft pops of trapped air. No insects scattered, no night creatures fled. Everything that should have moved was motionless. It paused beneath a leaning oak, the trunk curved like a spine under weight, bowing without a fight. The bark was scored by deep grooves, not from claws or tools, but from the slow collapse of time itself. The forest didn't feel dead, it felt abandoned by the idea of growth. A soft flutter broke the silence. The heron turned sharply. A moth, pale wings beating weakly. It drifted in a lazy spiral toward the heron, not out of fear or curiosity, simply because there was nowhere else to go. The heron watched it land awkwardly on a low branch, wings folding as if relieved to rest. The bird moved deeper into the trees. The sound of the marsh faded behind it. Still no sign of morning. Still no shift in light. The canopy above blocked what little sky remained, replacing it with interlocking silhouettes. A pattern of branches forming a ceiling that seemed built to hold darkness in place. The heron brushed past a cluster of reeds, growing unusually far from water. They rattled together softly, a brittle clatter that felt accidental, like bones touching. Up ahead, the forest opened slightly into a small clearing. At its center stood another tree, taller than the rest, trunk straight, its crown still full with leaves that drooped like tired hands. The soil beneath it was bare, worn smooth by countless steps of animals that once gathered there. But the heron saw no eyes glowing from the dark, no movement in the shadows, no breath outside its own. It tilted its head skyward. The crown of the tree should have been outlined by the first suggestion of pale dawn, that moment when black becomes blue and night exhales its fear. Yet the sky above was unchanged, flat, sealed, cold. The tree's leaves rustled once, a tiny shift, barely audible, and then they fell still again, like a sleeper turning in bed but refusing to wake. The heron remained silent. There was nothing to speak to. It stepped forward, deeper into the clearing, as if drawn by the only thing here, still holding shape. The tree did not move again. It simply stood, bowed beneath a morning that refused to arrive. The heron stepped out of the clearing and found open ground again, firm soil, coated with a thin layer of damp ash. The air was colder here, without the trees to trap what little warmth the marsh tried to hold. Mist rolled low across the earth in slow, reluctant waves. The bird stretched its wings fully this time. The feathers made a soft, brushing sound that seemed loud, not because it truly was, but because the world offered nothing to compete with it. Every slight motion became the only motion. With one push of its long legs, the heron lifted off the ground. The wings beat once, strong, wide. The sound should have bounced back from the earth or from the sleeping trees. Instead, it vanished. No echo. No reminder that the motion had ever occurred. The heron tried again, a more forceful stroke. The same emptiness followed. It was as if the air absorbed every trace of sound, protecting the silence like a secret. Below, the clearing shrank behind a thin layer of fog. Above, the dark sky remained unwilling to shift. The bird flew low, skimming over grass and the dark pools hidden beneath. Its shadow traveled with it, elongated, distorted by uneven ground. But even that seemed pale, diluted by the absence of light. Once, the heron changed direction sharply, cutting a narrow arc through the mist. The movement was smooth, born of instinct, but the world did not react. No startled flight of smaller birds, no ripples of alarm in the water. Everything was unaffected, as though the heron was the only thing not bound by this suspended moment in time. And yet it, too, felt caught. It beat its wings harder. The effort was real, the air resisted slightly, but nothing else acknowledged the motion. The marsh slid by beneath it. Shallow pools, abandoned nests, reeds bent under dew that refused to fall. The heron looked for something familiar, a sliver of pink on the horizon, a thin cry from another bird, a place where skies seemed thinner, but there was nothing. The world was not frozen. It breathed, it shifted, it existed. It simply refused to respond. The heron's heart worked faster, forcing warmth through a body surrounded by cold. Still it flew. Forward, because backward offered no difference. Eventually, its wings began to ache. The bird circled downward, landing on a partially submerged log that creaked underfoot. The water around it stirred, thick, slow, forming sluggish rings. The heron waited, listened. No echo of flight returned. Not a whisper. Just the soft rhythm of breathing, its own, the only sound bold enough to insist the world was still alive.